campus of Jamestown College. This is Knightwatch.
Good evening and welcome to Knightwatch, the JCTV Channel 16 Public Affairs program. I'm Matthew Nies. Somalia is a country without a government. Lawless areas, piracy, extreme poverty, lack of basic necessities. All of these combine to drive many thousands of Somalians away from their homeland in search of a better life. Where do these people go? For a large number of people, into the upper Midwest, including Minnesota and North Dakota, including right here in Jamestown. Tonight, Somali immigrants in Jamestown and throughout the area, sometimes misunderstood, sometimes embraced, and most times apart from the communities in which they live. But are they really so different than immigrants in previous waves coming to America? We'll get a chance to discuss that with our guests, Keith Norman of the Jamestown Sun and Dr. Timothy Bratton. But first, this background report from special correspondent Richard Schmidt.
Jamestown is the home of the world's largest buffalo and to many people of European descent. Last February, it also became home to 20 different Somali families who are here looking for the American dream. They left Somalia starting January 1991 when their country's government collapsed in civil war.
If you come out of your house, like if you go shopping, you don't know if you're going to come back alive or not.
They killed my father and my big brother and my young brother.
I think it became part of survival, to kill, because, when this guy has, 2 or 3 kids and he doesn't have any way of feeding them except, to get hired for that, warlord guy who's giving him a gun and say, I will pay you $100 if you take this gun and, do whatever I tell you. He will do it, and that's what they do.
So a lot of people, when they get a chance to leave, that's like the happiest day they will have. They'll be so happy. If somebody says, "Oh, let me take you. You want to come to America? You want to go to Europe?" That's a good opportunity for them, and they're gonna be happy about that too. So at least they can start their life somewhere else and be happy, live a normal life.
Somalis have taken refuge throughout the world. Many of the Somalis living in Jamestown have been U.S. citizens for up to 10 years and heard about North Dakota through friends living in Fargo and Grand Forks.
Kids can go to school, it's good education, it's good place to live in North Dakota.
A few Jamestown people had met a Somali, but everyone had an opinion about them.
I've never met any of them. I see them around like at Walmart and stuff, but not afraid or anything of the people from Somalia. I think that everyone should be welcome here. That's the whole basis for our country. So
Somalians don't belong here because they're taking housing vouchers that belong to us. I also hear they're kind of rude when they go in stores and stuff, and a lot of people told me that, and basically. Most of them are Muslims, and I hear Muslims are just moving to places to take them over.
I asked if he'd met any or had any questions about them.
Not really, no. I already know what I know already, so.
City Council member Charlie Karajan works in a downtown office next to Jama's African Foods.
A lot of the other Somalians have come in, and I've got to know them, and they seem to know me, and we get along pretty good. You should get to know them before you judge them too severely. And unfortunately, most of them are Muslims, and there's a lot of bad press about the Muslims, and people just judge everybody by the bad ones, just like anything else.
Somali men and women sense judgment.
They have seen the same thing I seen when I came here, why people looking at us like, we different, like we're in the wrong place. That's the same way I felt, I have seen people look at me like, yo, like I'm in somebody's house, you know what I mean? Like I can't walk into your house and people look at me like, what are you doing? What are you doing in my house?
Somalis want to sustain their culture, but also want to be part of American culture.
Because we live in America, that is the only way we can survive here, celebrate with the Americans.
It's easier said than done.
We came from way different culture and country, and we came here, and it's confusion, So I'm glad that our kids, like her generation, my generation, the young ones, go to school and bring home, the experience of the school and teach the parents,
Most Somali men found jobs in Jamestown, but Somali women haven't been as fortunate.
So we wait one day maybe, and we like it. When we got a job, say, yeah, we got a job. So we like it, we stay, But the pressure we have is, you have to pay light, you have to pay food, you have to pay your car.
One Somali man's side job is educating his country through music. He's a member of Wayab Housam, which means new era in English.
Our goal is to tell the young generation that they fight for nothing, and all people giving them gun and drugs to kill each other.
The group still collaborates and has added former militia members.
When I listened to the band's music, I was convinced that I didn't belong to the battlefields. I decided to come out here and join them spread the message.
But this educational alternative still has a deadly price.
We got a lot of phone calls for the warlords that they're saying if you don't stop it, we're gonna kill you. We know where you at, guys. They sent me a couple of emails that they told me that at that time I was in Denver, Colorado. They told me that we know you're in Denver, Colorado. We're gonna come there and get you, And I was wondering. The next day they shoot one of my friends, the band elder. He's in Kenya. They shoot him a couple times in his stomach,
The group continues their battle in Somalia's civil war, hoping one day to peacefully sing and rap at home. Other Somalis plan to rebuild their country by attending college to bring home education.
We are the future, Everybody that survived to get out the country, wherever they made it, Europe, we spread all around the world, Somalians are not only in Jamestown, not only in America. Everybody in his mind, every Somalian live every corner in the world, his mind is coming back home one day.
For JCTV News, this is Richard Schmidt, Jamestown.
When we come back, we'll be joined by our regular news analyst, Keith Norman of the Jamestown Sun, and our special guest, Dr. Timothy Bratton of the Jamestown College Department of History and Political Science. Welcome back to our program. If you're just joining us, this is Knightwatch, the JCTV Channel 16 monthly public affairs program. I'm joined by our special analyst, Keith Norman of the Jamestown Sun. Keith, thanks for coming on. Welcome to the show once again, and Dr. Tim Bratton of the History and Political Science Department at Jamestown College. Dr. Bratton, thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
Now, before we delve into some of the issues that we see today, let's review some of the history of Somalia a little bit, and what has brought about the immigration from Somalia to the United States. When most people think of Somalia, they often think of disorder and chaos and, of course, pirates. But it wasn't always that way. Dr. Bratton, can you tell us, our viewers, a little bit more about the history of Somalia and how things have arisen to the way that they are?
Well, it's been there for a long time. It used to be called Punt. The ancient Egyptians traded with it during the reign of Queen Hatshepsut of the 18th dynasty. She has inscribed on her temples this big legendary expedition to Punt. Frankincense and myrrh came from that. It's quite possible that some of the gifts Jesus had were from Somalia. It's also a major fishing area, but it's an arid climate, semi-arid, very little land suitable for agriculture. Most of the people in the interior basically graze cattle on the scrubland. Only 38% of the population's literate. The average income is under $600 a year. It's a very arid country. At various times in the Middle Ages, there were local sultanates. Arab traders came in the 7th century AD and brought Islam with them. Bantu tribesmen moved in, and the Kushites, but eventually you get this people called the Somalis, and they have their own unique language. In the 19th century, it became part of the Sultanate of Zanzibar. The Sultan was down in what's Madagascar and Tanzania, but they did have control over Somalia. And then in the 1840s, the British came in and wanted coastal stations in what's now northern Somalia. And then in 1885, the Italians came in, and the British and the Italians became the two big occupiers of Somalia. In 1920, and this is important because there's an Al-Qaeda affiliate in southern Somalia called the Al-Shabaab movement, and they got their inspiration from a man by the name of Muhammad Abdullah, who the British uncharitably called the Mad Mullah. And he tied up the British from 1900 to 1920. He was a jihadist. He was a fierce nationalist. He wanted to impose a very strict fundamentalist Sharia law. He literally killed other Sufi leaders who he thought were not sufficiently conservative enough. And he often played the British against the Italians. And finally, in 1920, the Royal Air Force located his headquarters and bombed him, and that was the end of him. But he was a much revered national figure because he had tried to drive the British and the Italians out, and I'm afraid that he's the inspiration for the Al-Qaeda affiliate down there. In 1960, the country finally got its independence, but it was not well prepared for independence. The British, to give them credit, did try to educate the Somalis under their control. Some of them did have European training, and the British would allow them to at least have minor posts in the administration. And even to this day, the areas of Somalia that tend to function the best are the British. But in the 1920s and 30s, Mussolini was in charge of Italian Somaliland, and they did not care about the natives at all. And so when the country got independence in 1960, it wasn't prepared. You didn't have an educated class. Political scientists and anthropologists regard Somalia as a failed state. They said it should work on paper. 99.9% of the population are Sunni Muslims. They have a common language and culture, but they said everyone's allegiance is to family and tribe. So they may do lip service to we're Somalis, but when push comes to shove, your loyalties are to the clan and the tribe, and that's just lethal. Somali politicians just don't seem to put the interests of the country first.
In 1991, they had a big civil war.
Well, Said Barre was driven out of power. What happened is within 5 years, the state failed because when they formed their parliament, you got all these petty little interest groups, and the country wasn't working. So a major general by the name of Said Barre seized power, and initially it worked. But then he got into a war with Ethiopia, and it was a disaster because 1.5 million Somalis who had been living in Ethiopia came back to Somalia after he lost the war in the mid-70s. And so you've got a poor country, and suddenly you have to absorb 1.5 million refugees. And then on top of that, he's pegged as a loser. He's lost the war. And he became kind of like Colonel Gaddafi. He started out really well, and by the end, he was bombing his own people to stay into power, and he was hiring foreign mercenaries from the Union of South Africa and from Zimbabwe because he couldn't trust his own people. And so the people rebelled against him. He was finally driven out in 91, and then the warlords took over. They couldn't agree on who should be the central government in Somalia. There was all this weaponry floating around, and you had the formation of these warlords, basically. And up until the early 2000s, there were 14 attempts to establish provisional governments, and they all failed because invariably one faction or warlord would drop out and the fighting would start again.
Well, and then today, now we see a lot of pirate activity there, and that stems from the warlords. So coming then over to America, obviously a lot of Somalians want to escape the fighting and the civil war over there. But one of the things I guess that's on my mind, and Keith, maybe you know the answer to this, why come to Jamestown, North Dakota? It's completely different from Somalia.
It's completely different than any place in Africa, I'm sure. I think they're looking for the opportunities we have here. We're in a time when much of the national economy is suffering, and North Dakota is one of those bright places out there within the national economy.
Now, does Stutsman County or Jamestown, do they reach out and try to get immigrants to move here? Do they have programs in place like that, or is it just coincidence?
My understanding is there was no effort by any government or even private organization to bring them here. They selected this based on their own research or decision-making process.
Mm-hmm. And what has been the community reception? Have they more or less embraced them coming, or?
Well, I don't think you can say that they've been embraced. One of the things I question is how much the public, in general, has had.
You'll have to hold that thought. We'll get back to that when we come back. Thank you, gentlemen, for our discussion. We'll be right back with more right after this. Welcome back once again to Night Watch. I'm Matthew Nies. I'm joined today in studio by our analyst from the Jamestown Sun, Keith Norman, and Dr. Timothy Bratton of the History and Political Science Department here at Jamestown College. Now, before the break, Keith, we were talking a little bit about community reaction to the Somalis moving here.
I just question how much interaction the community and the Somalis have had. It doesn't seem like the people I've talked to, many have even met any of the Somalis. And it's tough to embrace or to reach any sort of understanding or have any sort of public dialogue or relationship with people you're not meeting. And I question whether that's probably got to be the first step to them fitting into the community.
Now, you're a member of this community, Dr. Bratton. Mm-hmm. Have you noticed community support or engagement with the Somalis? Like, what have you noticed?
Well, during the street fair, the Somalis did have a booth. I think that was a positive thing. I did meet a Somali engineer, but he had been here for years up at Goodrich, and he was kind of looking forward to becoming a Somali community leader. And occasionally you see Somalis shopping at Walmart. But I have to say, quite honestly, yes, they're virtually invisible. I'd have to agree with Keith. You just don't see that many.
Is it kind of something that the community members talk about a lot? Like, do you hear it around town, people?
I don't think it's a top of mind awareness thing in the community. There are probably incidents that bring it to top of mind, but overall, I don't think it's that type of issue in the community. Mm-hmm. That's my thought.
Right. In November, there was a Rotary committee meeting at the mall here in Jamestown, and one of the issues addressed pertained to housing. Can you tell us what were a few main points and the overall effectiveness of the meeting?
I was not a party to that meeting or reporting on it, so I guess I don't feel comfortable commenting on it. I am not sure what its official standing was in the community either.
Did you hear any reaction to it from community members?
Not really.
No. Okay. Now, one of the things brought up is the issue of their different culture, different religion, different clothing that they dress in. Has that been an issue of controversy between some community members? Have there been reports of them not getting jobs or maybe being discriminated against a little bit? Or?
There was one incident that was reported that ended up as a police call involving a business in town. I did a news story on it. That's the only one I'm aware of, and I don't know whether that situation probably got blown out of proportion. I think some people got angry on both sides, and things deteriorate from there always, no matter what the situation. But overall, again, I'm not. The incidents of those type of things are very limited in the community.
Mm-hmm. Now, Dr. Bratton, you mentioned that 99.9% of the Somalis are Sunni, albeit different sections of Islam. But do you think that religion might play a factor in their being accepted here in Jamestown, or what would you say?
Well, that's difficult to say. I think one thing the community should do is remember that Jews and Christians and Muslims all are technically children of Abraham. They all claim Abraham as a common ancestor, and they're all monotheists. And so I think if we're going to have community harmony, we should emphasize that. I think it would be really disastrous if either group started to make claims of superiority that would just breed horrible problems. So I think we should concentrate on the similarities rather than the differences. I mean, they're not going to make any Christian converts, and I don't think Christians are going to make any Islamic converts. So I think we have to emphasize tolerance. I'm not too worried about the long run about them fitting in. Anthropologically, actually, the first generation tends to stay to themselves because they're in a foreign country. They don't know the language. The children are kind of half and half because they grow up still hearing the parents' language, but they want to be acclimated. And usually by the third generation, they fit in. And so when you have so many people getting upset about foreigners coming to the United States, I refuse to get excited about it because in 3 generations they'll be Americans. And probably the 3rd or 4th generation will say, gee, I want to hear about the old country. You know, I can't even envision what it's like. And that's been the pattern over and over again in American history. We have this very 3-generation process of assimilation.
And many of the people in the community are those 3rd and 4th generation immigrants from Europe or wherever they've come from. So we're just a few steps ahead of them, I guess, in the Americanization.
Now, one of the things you hear is some instances of some khat that's some Somalis smuggle. Has there been any instances of reporting that happening here in Jamestown?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't read every police report, but I'm not aware of any.
Khat is a drug that grows in an evergreen in Somalia, and when it's crushed and chewed, kind of like chewing tobacco, it's somewhat like methamphetamine and causes excitement. In high doses, it can cause psychosis. Some of the pirates are, when they go out and make the blunder of taking on warships, are often under the influence of khat. But it is a problem. The dried leaves are not as potent. And in fact, the Food and Drug Administration had it rated pretty low, but if you get fresh leaves, it's much more potent, and now they're beginning to classify fresh khat as, I think, class 4, which is right up with heroin and really hard stuff. So it is a concern. And one problem is that when the Somalis came over, you do have, again, that clan structure. So sometimes former enemies are coming over. And so you have to hope that we're Somalis in a strange country, so we have to hang together. Our society and our beliefs transcend the old tribal warfare. But that's a source of concern, is that if the wrong factions came over, they could wind up side by side in Minneapolis, and then you've got problems.
So going forward, is there anything that we should do in Jamestown? Like, do you see any organizations being formed? Or?
I'm not aware of anybody really facing off to address this as an issue. I think the impetus has to come from the Somali community, where they have to start having a little more of an interaction.
Thank you very much, but we're out of time for today. Thank you for joining us.